Hi, how are you? I'm spending most days either looking like a camp counselor, and not having time to switch gears. So I am in my professional shirt and my camp counselor look, and I just kind of go back and forth between the two. So you're getting the best of both worlds, an attempt to rock as best I can through summer. Probably like you all, everybody's juggling so many things and got running in different directions. So again, thank you for your hard work. I am sorry I'm tardy to the party, to recording this video. It's not that this topic doesn't mean a lot to me. A lot of life has just happened, nothing emergent, but just, uh, needing to help my parents, do a major clean out of their home. And that just took more than many days than I thought it was. So I just got behind. And I'm going to be finishing up grading today your strengths-based perspective assignments, as well as your ethical dilemma presentation. So I'm really excited about it. So didn't want you to think I had forgotten or that it wasn't important. So today's topic, anti-racist practice in the field of social work. Um, I find this to be uh, very layered when presenting it because I think that it's so important, and we just are ever evolving in how we practice. I think it can be at times like uncomfortable when we talk about how we developed our practices or where we are in the process of developing our anti-racist practices. Maybe everybody's at a different starting point. Maybe you're just starting, and that's okay, because again, we're lifelong learners, and I think that we can get really caught up in, did I say that right? Could I offend somebody? What does that look like? And I think that when we talk about our past experiences and, we say, I'm so sorry, I hope I don't offend anybody by, saying this, kind of leads the charge of I'm trying to be really mindful with the statement I'm about to make or the question I'm about to ask on what is such a very important topic, but can also be an emotionally charged topic based on if you have been the victim of racism or the survivor of a racist education system, a work environment, academic setting. And those who might not have had shared experiences based on privilege, based on where they grew up, what have you, I think can get really awkward. I know I've been awkward before, but I hope I don't offend. I might not say the right thing. And then sometimes I say nothing at all. Even when I'm thinking, I feel like that might be relevant to the conversation, or I think this might be a good question, but I'm not going to ask it. So I want to start by saying that my journey started, really truly started, mindfully and intentionally started in the spring, yeah, of 2018. That was 6 years ago. Wow, feels like it was 2019. I don't know about you all, but COVID has like just done a number on like, was that 10 years ago or like last week? So anyway, at least 5 years ago, the Coalition of Black Social Workers asked Austin Channing Brown to come to UT to spend the weekend presenting to the Coalition of Black Social Workers specifically. And then on Sunday, opening it up to all of us, faculty, staff, students, and even the individuals, alumni, what have you. And she spoke at the Nashville Public Library. And it was going to be talking about a lot of her experiences growing up, what she had endured and encountered along the way, how she was trying to, as a Black woman, teach and empower other Black women while also educating those who lacked knowledge around anti-racist practice, behaviors, and then encourage individuals to expand upon their cultural curiosity. Probably many of you all have heard that, we used to use cultural competence, but we never arrive. We never fully get there, which is why we continue to deep dive into knowing more, even when we think I'll never know. I'll never know what this means. And hearing Austin Channing Brown speak that day, and she said that she used to judge the success of her speaking engagement by the amount of white woman tears. I'll never forget that moment. And that was because what she was referencing was that her experience, her writings, her examples were provided an example or a platform as to what other Black, brown, marginalized communities had experienced. And she did a great job presenting it. And so therefore, if somebody was maybe crying, they didn't know that they had been part of the problem, or they had caused harm, that she had kind of opened up people's eyes, right? And she went on to explain she was not intending on causing guilt or shame, but to open one's eyes to, how are you contributing? What are you doing, both positive and negative, right, in your journey to allyship. So a lot of the conversation, well, not as much now that I think about it, a good portion of the conversation talked about the pathway to allyship. And as I sit here on this recording, having recorded this a few times, wondering, am I going to say this correctly? I really did not, I thought I understood what allyship meant, but I didn't. I didn't fully. And so it was then and there that I did do a little crying. I felt guilty of not done enough. She writes a chapter in her book, I'm Still Here, talking about white fragility, right? And how fragile we are. And in that moment, I was thinking, here I am crying. And I'm guilt and shame. And as one of my colleagues at UT, who now is a very close friend, but then we were colleagues, she just said, you can sit in the guilt and shame. You can feel it all day long. You can, but it does nothing for you when the tears stop, the guilt ends, and the shame goes away. It doesn't. You have a choice after you feel the feels and think the things and question who you've been, who you've offended. You have a choice to act or be stagnant. You could even go backwards. You could be angry, and you could be angry, and you could think, I've done a bunch. I'm tired of reading. I'm tired of learning. I always mess it up. That's part of the journey, right? That's part of getting to a place and thinking, know what I'm talking about, and then being told, actually, that's not the right way to say it. That was in the wrong context. And we could throw our hands up and be, I'm done, right? Or we can absorb and sit in. I can be tired of trying to learn more about it. That's okay. And then I can also do more. Okay, so I can both be tired because I don't think I'll ever get it or I'll ever arrive, and I can just throw my hands up, or I can continue on. So obviously, throughout the events of 2020, 2021, eyes wide open, not knowing how to support my Black and brown friends and colleagues through George Floyd, the horrific, brutal murder of George Floyd, and then Breonna Taylor, just both just seemingly so close that it was just, we're grieving one and then we're having to grieve another, and not knowing what to do or say, how can I help? And really just learning as I went in the conversations I had, and then sometimes being told, I don't want to talk about it anymore. You're not the one I want to talk to about. Absolutely. And also being told, but thanks for reaching out. Thanks for trying. Sometimes that wasn't said. Sometimes it was just an acknowledgement of, I see you trying, but you don't have to. Say all that to say, I love this journey that I'm on. I won't stop learning. I won't stop. Um, uh, I'll always ask for feedback. So if you have any feedback after this lecture, I would love to hear it. If something, if it didn't sit right with you and you were like, I don't know about that, let me know. I'm open to it. I'm learning, and accepting, part of asking for feedback is being humble enough to know that you might be wrong or mistaken, right? And I'm no longer afraid of that, because the way I view conflict and now kind of look at it as someone is offering me a chance to contemplate and grow and learn and contemplate, do I want this feedback and how do I want to act? And so I value that. So I will say that one of my friends, during the pandemic, she was like, what are you doing? I was like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I said that. I didn't know. And it wasn't something bad. It was just like, I commented on a post that her husband had made. And she was like, you can't say that, what have you. I mean, I sat in that for like days, and she called me. She's like, I know you're still probably like crying your tail off. I love you so much. I'm going to explain why I said you can't say that. Um, and well, I'm just gonna tell you what I said, because again, I was like, oh my gosh. So being very close friends and colleagues with her, she and I, over the years, she was a student, and during her time at UT, she was the only Black female in her classes. So not in the cohort, but in her classes. And when I looked back at when I would teach her and and her peers, her classmates, and I would ask questions around, back then it was diversity, it was oppression. I remember kind of like sometimes like looking at her with the assumption that maybe she would be the expert. I didn't really know at all how she grew up, where she came from, anything. I just used my eyes as the lens to have the individual in the room guide me. Being the wonderful human that she was and is, oftentimes she would guide me, and she would laugh, and we'd talk after class. She'd give me feedback. After she graduated, we developed a very close friendship. She ended up working in private practice with me, and just a human that I've been able to go to and say, I'm so sorry, I'm about to ask this or say this. Please stop me in my rambling if you're like, go figure it out. 9 times out of 10, she would just say, that's a really great question. I'm glad you're curious about it. Here's my feedback. And sometimes she'd just be like, I'm not in the place where I want to like have this conversation discussion. Moving forward. So during COVID, her husband had posted something about their fraternity, a historically Black male fraternity, getting together and gathering as brothers to attend one of the marches. A peaceful march, maybe partly a rally and then a march. And they were going to go together and kind of figure out, just kind of standing in solidarity where everyone could be. So it was just like a public broadcast of like, reach out to me if you want to join our group. And I made a comment, so and so, you and the brothers have inspired me to think more about ways to attend and maybe offer support. I didn't think at all. I did not even give it one thought that that was not appropriate for me to use that word in the same, or the term brother in the same context as her husband. I didn't. I just sort of went off of your brother. So it's not, my biological brother and I. This is brother in a collective sense of a fraternal quantifier. And she called me immediately. She's like, hey, I gotta tell you something. I'm gonna hurt your feelings. You're gonna cry because you hate to hurt people. It's gonna hurt your feelings, right? I was like, oh boy. She's like, hey, my husband is not gonna delete your comment. It's gonna be up to you as to what to do. But he gave me some feedback. He didn't really want to take the time to call you because he wasn't like, who cares? I know Katie Veit, she's not trying to do any harm. He's not gonna delete your comments. Up to you what to do. And she kind of explained the context behind. The intent was there to acknowledge and honor the nature of the post. The language and reference that I made didn't necessarily devalue the post or take away or anything like that. It was truly meant as a sign of support. And there were even a couple of like, absolutely, tell us what we can do, our neighbor, blah, 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 blah. Doesn't matter. And I did. I was just like, oh, I'm a horrible person. I just sounded horrible. And, I have just been set back so far on my journey. Can't believe it. Apologizing. And she was like, that's actually, you can look at it as a setback or you can look at it as a step forward. Right? I was like, that was 10 steps backwards. Maybe I'm at the starting point. And she said, no, you can look at it as a step forward because you posted something, took it down, and you had every intention of support. And then you found out that that was not really helpful or just wasn't appropriate, what have you. You took it down and you apologized and you were going to think through it. It was hard. It was ugly. It was uncomfortable. But recognizing that and going deeper into hearing the feedback, she was like, things took a little step forward. I still feel guilty about it, but all that to say, in that moment was one of those moments where I just did the white fragility, white guilt. And I sat in and was like, I was just trying to say something nice. I didn't mean to offend. Like, why can't I be given the benefit of the doubt? Oh, I'm being completely transparent here because I had that little bitty moment of like, and I was like, no, 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 no. That's you feeling guilty and sitting in the guilt and the shame. And now you're just being like, meh. So get over yourself, right? And say, I hurt somebody and I hate to hurt people. I hate to offend people. People pleaser, shocker. So just get over yourself, move on, right? I just wanted to be transparent and give that example because I am human and I feel like maybe you have made a mistake like that, or maybe you have been on the other end and had to contemplate telling your friend or colleague, hey, may want to rethink that. And perhaps the discomfort that you had to feel as the person who had to educate an individual on what they've done. That's exhausting. I don't know what that feels. I've just heard that can be really exhausting, having to constantly monitor things like that. Whichever side you've been on, not side, whichever role you've played, it's complicated. So I had all mad respect for my friend of just like, gratitude. I couldn't quit thanking her. That was in 2020, June 2020. and we don't laugh about it now. She'll just kind of be like, if you stop crying, or like, what have you been crying about lately? What have you done? Who have you offended? How far back did you go? Did you take any steps forward? And we're able to not necessarily make light of the situation, but just sort of find the humor and the banter around it. As I say that, I want to hit like stop, record, and start over. But that that would be me kind of feeling like, oh, what I do. I want feedback. So here I go with this PowerPoint. And I'd like feedback on the PowerPoint as well. Okay, so one thing that sometimes makes me feel uncomfortable is when I say how to apply anti-racist practices in the social work field. I want to add, and I'm still learning too. So I need to add that. So I'm still learning on how to apply. So just wanted to acknowledge right now, I'm like, I should have put and I am learning as well, and growing in my practices. So again, how do we do this? Kind of what I spoke about before is just an overwhelming task, and it can just be really challenging to know where to start. And sometimes we want this like, here's the path, this is this step one, and then phase two, and there's just no perfect way. And that's why taking every opportunity to learn as much as you can, and then figuring out how to put those practices in place is sometimes a start. And then that's where that curiosity comes from. I want to learn a little bit more so that if given the chance or opportunity, maybe I could use something that I learned that would be applicable in this situation. So the definition of anti-racist practice, an approach in social work that actively being the key word, okay, works against racism in all its forms, both at an individual and a systemic level. The importance of addressing racism in social work, recognizing the pervasive impact of racism on the individuals and communities, and the ethical imperative to challenge it. And then just the overview of key principles that are essential for understanding and engaging in anti-racist practice. I used to say, I used to be like, this racism and understanding it. And then I took a step back and just thought, is it so bad if I include the definition of racism? Would I just assume that maybe individuals have a different perception? Now, I would hope. But, you know, defining it and its manifestation. So the identification of racism as prejudice, discrimination, antagonism directed against someone of a different race based on the belief that one's own race is superior. And then the difference between individual and systematic racism, the differentiation between our personal biases or actions and larger systems and structures that perpetuate racial inequality and oppression. So personal biases or actions in larger systems and structures. And understanding the overall impact of racism on individuals, communities, and society. The acknowledgement of the profound and far-reaching effects of racism on mental health, physical health, and socioeconomic status and overall well-being. Far-reaching effects, far-reaching being the next generation perhaps, or affecting a patient or a client, which in turn affected their family, which in turn had a disruption to the system. So kind of that, okay, you could have just hurt, damaged, uh, exhibited prejudice comments or behaviors to an individual, and while they might not have said anything to you, and then go home and say it, then it becomes maybe a family partner issue, partner conversation. So just how does that go from just the initial either conversation, what have you, and do a far-reaching effect? Intersectionality and power dynamics. The explanation of intersectionality. See, I'm nervous. And its relevance to anti-racist practice. So understanding that individuals hold multiple social identities that intersect and interact, leading to the unique experience of privilege and oppression. Okay, so there's multiple social identities. It's a key piece here. The recognition of power dynamics based on race, gender, class, and other intersecting identities. So being aware of how power operates within social structures and relationships, influencing access to resources, opportunities, and decision-making processes. Who is making the decision? Who's in the position of power that's going to determine what individuals of another race, gender, class, want. And the importance of addressing multiple forms of oppression and anti-racist work. I'm going to slow it down. Emphasis on recognizing and challenging various forms of discrimination and oppression, including racism, sexism, ableism, homophobia, transphobia, and classism. So in social work, what's our plan? What's our process? Do we need to take a training on how to address the multiple forms of oppression as we dive deeper into the work or the experiences needed to do so, language, what have you? Cultural competence versus anti-racist practice, okay? Really want you to understand the difference between the two. Recognizing that cultural competence focuses on understanding and respecting diverse cultures. Okay, so we understand and respect, but we don't ever fully arrive, right? While anti-racist practice involves actively challenging systematic racism and promoting equity. So kind of taking a cultural competence training, right, where your cultural curiosity is peaked. I'm going to take this training, this language training. I can't think of anything off the top of my head. And I'm curious about it. And then that's cultural curiosity, right? Or trying to achieve cultural competence. And the anti-racist practice is action involving maybe what you learned in a training, the feedback you've been given from a friend or a colleague, and challenging the systematic racism to promote equity. And it might be, again, that the person that is actively practicing racist or applying racist beliefs, tendencies, languages, personal biases to the situation, while they might not mean to offend or hurt, that doesn't matter. It's us addressing it in the context of the situation. Highlighting the limitations of color blindness, which ignores the the realities of racism and cultural relativism, which can perpetuate cultural stereotypes and inequalities. I will be very transparent that my parents growing up, if we said anything racist or used any slur, slang, what have you, which we didn't, it was understood that we would be punished severely. So it was not allowed. At the same time, we were taught that being colorblind was appropriate, right? Like we don't see color, we see everybody. Everybody's the same. We have feelings, we have hearts, we have families, all the things. And a while back, that was 40 years ago, and then kind of even progressing onward, just we're all the same, right? We're all the same. And never once thinking about the concept of being colorblind and seeing everything the same discounts the cultural relativism, right? That we discount what an individual can bring based on race and culture. And it wasn't until, or bring, we're not all the same. And it wasn't until graduate school, the class was called oppression. Oppression, and then the second half, I think, was systemic oppression. I can't remember. That was the first time I ever heard the term colorblindness and the negative impact that it had. Talk about sitting in guilt. And point 3, prioritizing efforts to dismantle oppressive systems and institutions that perpetuate racial inequality and advocating for policies and practices that promote fairness and justice for all. So I've had students, say, this is a really big responsibility. I'm working in a nonprofit, and I'm trying to keep my eyes open, my ears to the ground. I'm afraid I will miss something, or I'll be really scared to speak out in a team meeting, right? My supervisor said something, and she or he or they are in a position of power, and I'm supposed to prioritize the effort I will, the effort I should make to dismantle the oppressive system or statement. And I feel overwhelmed. I don't think I can do it. And it's like, you have to. Well, there are ways to do it, right? And there are, protocol and, duty. We have an obligation to our colleagues, go to one-on-one. If you can't talk with them, go to somebody else. But sometimes we also hear things and we think that doesn't sound quite right, but I don't know why it doesn't sound quite right. And then that makes me uncomfortable to address it, because I'm like, well, maybe I'm wrong. So just that, if you feel this immense amount of pressure, and not that it's keeping you up at night, but just when you go to work, you're just on high alert, be on high alert, but know that it can feel like a lot of pressure to prioritize if you don't know what you're doing or how to do it. And that's when seeking out a training, how do I address this? What are the changes I can make? What are the steps to those changes? So that you have support about on how to go about changing a system, a policy, or a practice that will promote fairness and justice for all. So reviewing our social work ethical principles related to anti-racist practice, looking at that, you guys did a deep dive with the code of ethics, and probably looked at the implications that a specific code had on a specific group or community. It does not seem as if it's aligning with maybe the code of ethics or personal beliefs, or it is oppressive in nature. And again, just the overall commitment to promote the well-being, right? Which our code of ethics says is to do no harm, promote the well-being of others, and preserve the dignity of all individuals. And that obligation to challenge discrimination and advocate for equity. So just acknowledging your responsibility, and then also figuring out, if there's a training that maybe colleagues or, other coworkers can take, right? Could that be one of the solutions in the advocacy of policies that need to be changed, et cetera. Intersectionality in practice, integrating an intersectional perspective into social work practice to understand the complex interplay of social identities and experiences of oppression and privilege. Recognizing and affirming diverse identities and lived experiences of clients and patients that you serve, and tailoring interventions to meet their specific needs and goals. If you are working in a clinical setting or offering clinical services, mental health services, maybe in the form of counseling, what have you, how are the interventions that you are using promote the well-being of your client? Is it appropriate? Have you taken into account how that intervention might not be culturally appropriate for this individual? That could be as simple as a language barrier and practicing EMDR. And not that it can't be done, but if it's one of those things where it's like the emotional language is different or is not accounted for in one language or the other, it can be hard to go through that process when we are expecting someone to process a situation based on emotion, experiences, and memories. Not that it can't be done, it's just kind of the example that I thought of. Point 3, we talked about a little bit in the slide before. Cultural humility and reflexivity. Kind of what I talked about before of this just being a lifelong process of self-reflection, overall self-awareness, and acknowledging our limitations and biases and committing to continuous learning and growth. When I first learned about like bias, I know that I don't have any biases. No, not at all. Dig a little deeper and dig a little deeper and like, okay, you know what? That's a little bit of a personal bias coming from a place of maybe misunderstanding or feeling like I'll never get it, so I shouldn't have to. And why does this person expect me to get it? I'm working so hard, that kind of thing of where my humility was, I was not humble, and acknowledging, the limitations to the process and my part in the process. And just a continuation of us to critically examine our own cultural beliefs, biases, and assumptions, and then remaining open, right? To new perspectives and experiences. I think, I don't know if it wasn't what year it was, but on my journey where I think I said, maybe I didn't say this at the beginning of class, but going back to being called out, there's a power differential. I don't want it to be there between student and professor. I'm doing the grading. Perhaps if you call me out, that can influence my bias. I could feel like conflict. Maybe she doesn't like conflict. Maybe she doesn't like to be called out. Not at all. I think what I used to hide behind was if I ask for feedback, they're going to give it. And if they give me feedback, someone gives me feedback, it means I've done something wrong. I've offended somebody. They're not going to want to come back. I've hurt them deeply. So I'm not going to put that disclaimer out there. I had to check myself at the door. That was being afraid of hearing what I just said, that they offended somebody and that the guilt would take over. Or the other fear I had was, will a student will think I'm ignorant? Same in like faculty meetings. If I challenge something, ask a question, will they think I'm ignorant? You know what? I'm not the sharpest tool in the shed, right? But I especially do not want to sound like I know what I'm talking about, speak with authority, and then someone not calling me out, being like, "You're what? What are you thinking?" I'm not making any sense. I hope I'm making sense. But part of the fear of asking for feedback was knowing that when you ask for feedback and you get feedback and it's not what you want to hear, all the things you could feel when you receive that feedback. Actively seeking out diverse perspectives and experiences. How do we do that? How do we actively seek out diverse perspectives and experiences? Where do we go to do that? What does that look like? That can be in a class or your internship where you just generally ask, how does one's life experience and the environment, community, setting, circumstance, influence who you are, your experience, perspectives. And so this can be inclusive of everyone. You're not calling somebody out based on you think they have a different different cultural background. Had a student a couple of years ago, and it was uncomfortable, but she was like, I mean, let's be real. Like, we're all, here talking about cultural competence, and cultural sensitivity, and we're all white. Feels awkward, feels uncomfortable. We can't assume that. We can't assume that using our eyes, right? We can't go ahead and just everybody looks exactly the same, because at that point we're discounting and we are assuming all experiences are going to be the same. And maybe some of them are. They're going to overlap one culture to the other, one race to the other, ethnicity, cross culture, what have you. But assuming that might shut somebody down from sharing if they're like, well, I don't identify as the white female you think I am. Actually, I do identify as, this, this individual of this particular race, culture, ethnicity, background, affiliation, tribal affiliation, etc. So I think it's just asking, and I've noticed when I ask, how did your person and environment, how did your environment, how you grew up, family traditions, customs, celebrations, how you were taught to, I don't know, I'm drawing a blank here because I feel like I'm like not explaining myself right, but that opens the door to say, well, in my family, not identifying as anything other than I'm going to identify in my family, we we're not allowed to express our feelings. We're not allowed to talk about anything other than surface conversation. And this is an example from a class last year. And an individual raised her hand and she said, I am from the Hispanic community. And much like yours, we did not talk about feelings, or bring up anything that could be conflictual in nature, because that was just part of our culture. That was a cultural norm. And again, open the door to someone identifying or being example to a diverse perspective and experience around where we came from, how we got here, which then in turn is going to which in turn is going to affect how we practice, how we do assessments, the questions we're using. Is this a culturally relevant assessment or culturally appropriate assessment, a supervisor? It says here, to ask this, and that just does not seem sensitive at all. Can I offer another assessment that I learned at a training that's more culturally appropriate and sensitive? Because by asking this, did your racial background influence how you view mental health? That's an assumption, and it's not a sensitive way to ask that question or appropriate way to ask that question. Hope I'm making sense. I say that a lot. Am I making sense? That's really me being like, did I offend? Did I say something wrong? Was my example like not one that matched? What have you? Trauma-informed anti-racist practice, understanding that experiences of racism can result in psychological and emotional trauma for individuals and communities, and therefore have a individual very cautious or non-receptive of support services, case management from someone that in the past created a lot of trauma, right? A lot of trauma based on racist beliefs, attitudes, or language, and therefore looking at the trauma caused by a former assessment, what have you, and the application of trauma-informed principles, safety, trustworthiness, choice, collaboration, and empowerment, and address the impact of racism and support healing and overall resilience. How are we in this moment during the assessment going to empower, offer choices, develop rapport? Point 3, implementation of culturally relevant and contextually sensitive interventions that honor clients' cultural strengths, resources, and coping mechanisms, and promote healing and well-being. Much like we talked about, well, strengths-based perspective, as a lot of us have talked about in your papers, you know, that could bring out that part of a culture, community, race, ethnicity, certain affiliation, by just honoring the strengths. What are the strengths, benefits of your culture? How did your family, community, neighborhood, how did they promote growth, well-being, what resources they provided, what resource they provided you, what have you, and those being a strength or asset. And there's a book called Decolonizing Therapy by Dr. Jennifer Mullen. And she talks about how so many interventions, assessments, measuring scales are not culturally relevant and contextually sensitive interventions. And therefore, just the damage we are doing by not taking into consideration what we can do to change that. And again, she was talking to all mental health providers, not just counselors, but social workers, LMFTs, just a broad range of those in the mental health profession, about evaluating against the systems and methods, interventions we use that can cause trauma and squelch any type of honoring of where a client comes from. Allyship and advocacy, acknowledgement of the role of allies and actively supporting and advocating for marginalized communities and individuals, and then challenging systems of oppression. This to me can be hard because I never want to assume that my role as a white privileged woman is going to be the role that I play is going to be an active role. And if I lead the charge to change X, Y, or Z, I could be misrepresenting the needs of who I'm representing if I have not done a thorough assessment of the needs of those I am attempting to represent in the communities that I am representing or speaking on behalf of. So being very, very, very sensitive and thoughtful and intentional about the role of your active allyship, and learning as much as you can about what you're advocating for. Practical actions that allies can take that support racial justice efforts, kind of like what I just talked about, but listening to marginalized voices, amplifying concerns, and leveraging privilege to create change. I think that is going into the community, the neighborhood, and interviewing individuals before you go to the school board meeting to speak on what you think they need or want. And while you might not be wrong, you might be leaving something very crucial out to what their specific community needs when you have the chance to amplify your voice by leveraging your privilege in that school board meeting, in that board of directors meeting, to create change. And looking for ways to do that, opportunities to do that. Point 3, recognition of the importance of centering the voices and experiences of those most affected by racism and supporting collective efforts to dismantle systematic oppression and achieve racial equality. Big task sometimes feels like a big ask. While it can be overwhelming and hard to know where to start, we don't have to start with making some major community change. That'd be lovely. But oftentimes just starting with yourself, checking your biases, going through a training, taking an assessment, and just learning more about how to create change. Where to attend school board meetings after doing an on-the-ground assessment. And recognizing whomever you are, where you came from, background. We have the responsibility that can feel big, but it's never too late to start. It's never too late to start thinking and contemplating what we can do and how can we help. Call to action. As graduate students, encouraging you all to apply what you know, right? And you're in school right now, and perhaps your supervisor went to school 20 years ago, and she says, we're going to be attending this school board meeting. And given we are colorblind, we're going to see all individuals as alike. And we all have hearts and we all have souls. We were all born here, all these things. Yeah, we all have hearts and souls, but supervisor, hello, that's outdated. We want to go in with our eyes wide open to see color, to see how people, what individuals are wearing that represents culture, to check in to see what individuals need in the way of engagement, to feel safe and encouraged and supported. And oftentimes, you all are the ones, given you're in the midst of learning and growing, as I know you are, we count on you. No pressure. We rely on you to help us and support us. That was a lot. And I'm going to sit here. I'm going to contemplate like, oh, that was not the right example, or I don't know if I made any sense. And probably chances are that is the truth. I might have said something that was like, what is that? What? That was an example of that? Or like, what? I'm here for it. I'm here for the feedback. I'm here for conversation, open conversation. I encourage you to watch the video of panelists that I posted. That was the YouTube video. I just thought it was really good. I just thought, man, that there we go. You can listen to this lecture and be like, ooh. And then you'll listen to the panelist video and you'll be like, oh my gosh, Professor Veit, you shouldn't have even filmed that. But I encourage you to watch it or listen to it. And then I look forward to reading your next assignment that's not due until the 17th, is your anti-racist practice assignment. And I'm going to be sending out just a few changes in your favor, number of pages, references, and things like that. They're going to work in your favor. I hope you're having a good day. And I can't wait to, like I said, read those papers just to look at your journey. And I used to say at the end of anything, I'm so sorry if I'm really sorry if I offended, hurt you, or did anything wrong. And now I have said, if I'm so sorry, which I am, not to discount, I am sorry, but I've sort of reframed it in, I would be ever so grateful. And I'm not afraid to hear feedback that might hurt my feelings, make me sit in shame, could make me contemplate. And so I'm grateful for that. I'm gonna stop babbling. I'm gonna take my babbling, I'm gonna take my babbling self on out of here. Wherever you are, I hope the weather is, oh man, doing it justice. I don't know, but it is scorching here in Nashville, and I thought I could go for a walk at noon. That was the dumbest idea I've had all day. Someone passed me and rolled their window down. They're like, "You all right?" "Yeah, I'm fine, leave me alone." I was like, I just thought I could get in a quick walk. And it was like just hanging out on the surface of the sun. So I hope you're staying cool, and I hope you have a great rest of the week, and happy 4th of July, if that's a holiday that you celebrate. Um, that's all. I'm going to go ahead and hit end meeting for all.